Hello, listeners and viewers. Welcome to Changepreneurs podcast, where we bring conversations to spark positive change. My name is Sathish Kumar, founder of Changepreneurs podcast and a life coach from South India. I'm joined by my co host, Rajesh Gangwani, who is an executive and leadership communication coach from Mumbai, India. Today's guest has dedicated his life to one powerful idea: the awakened leader. Not leadership driven by mere strategies and tactics, but leadership that comes from presence, clarity, and alignment. His path began with applied psychology, evolved through philosophy and leadership, and was shaped by a profound inner shift that changed how he sees and experiences life. Today, his work integrates the practical and the profound, combining leadership performance with deep inner clarity. He doesn't tell people where to go, he meets them where they are and holds space for their own insight to emerge. With experience spanning global consulting, organizational leadership, board service with the International Coaching Federation, co authoring the book The Rise of a Manager as a Coach, and earning the Master Certified Coach credential from International Coaching Federation. At 29, he is perhaps one of the youngest MCCs in India or maybe in the world. Please join me in welcoming Rishi Rongala. Rishi, it is indeed a pleasure and honor to have you on our show.
Welcome,
Thank
Rishi.
you, Satish. Thank you, Rajesh. It's a pleasure.
Thank you. To start with, I thought I have a very interesting question. Rishi, just imagine you have some superpower to go back in time, to go back maybe to your childhood, and you have an option to change something about your life from the childhood.
Mhm.
If there is something that you would change, what would you change?
I have considered this question several times, and I'm pretty convinced that I wouldn't want to change anything.
Why?
Things always make sense looking backwards because when you see the effect, the cause is justified. When you're not able to see the effect yet, the cause feels like a problem that needs to be addressed and changed. When I was younger, I've talked about this openly before, that there was a point where I was dealing with depression. There was a point where I was having an existential crisis. Those were moments of what I call heat experiences, moments of pain that kind of cleared my lens so that I could see more clearly, perceive what's happening better. And that contributed a big deal to who I am today. And I'm absolutely in love with who I am today and what I'm experiencing in life. And anything that we change in the past can lead to a completely different present. So I'm really content with my present.
So, what would have been your answer 5 years ago?
5 years ago would be 2021. This would have been the answer as well. But
Hmm.
probably at that point, because I was pretty much spending most of my time in a spiritual trance, you could say, the
Hmm.
answer would have been something like, what past are you talking about? Or where does this past exist? Something more cutting, inquiry based rather than a more human response that I'm giving now.
So, Rishi, I'm wondering where to start this conversation after Satish's very interesting dive into this podcast. What does it mean to be the youngest MCC coach? And for people who are not so familiar, MCC stands for Master Certified Coach. It's a credential from ICF, which is a global body. It's the gold standard of coaching worldwide. So when people say that, at your age, you're probably the youngest MCC in India, and maybe I would imagine even globally, what does it really mean for you?
Let's break down this idea of youngest, right? Because I do not identify with the age of my physical body. It's a rather philosophically nonsensical idea, although it's practically useful. Because if you really look at the age of the body, Everything that makes up this body is as old as the universe itself. So it doesn't make any sense. It's just that if for transactional practical interactions, it has some utility. So I don't know, because I do not identify with it. It doesn't make that much of a difference being the youngest. But I have been told interpretations from other people about what it means that I found to be relevant and meaningful as a representative of the next generation of coaches, as a representative of mastery of ethics, rigor, so on and so forth, which all have to do with the credential itself, right? Uh, Now, to connect these both worlds, I feel that because I belong to a generation of coaches, which is very few people in my age group are into leadership coaching. And as you know, most of our colleagues are in their 40s and 50s. So it's this demographic gap that is there. I see that very interesting because it indicates that the understanding of coaching as a profession is maturing, and we are treating it as a skill to be developed, as like a medical doctor, right? You wouldn't imagine a medical doctor become a surgeon at 55 because they've realized they had a heart and they've suddenly had a heart attack and recovered, and then they studied about heart surgery. It would be such a waste of somebody's life if for 55 years they could have been a surgeon for the past 20 or 30. So that shift is how I'm perceiving this shift of life wanting to be a professional leadership coach in 20s itself through me.
Okay, that's like a very philosophical response, and let me just sort of take that bait. So if I were to choose a doctor, yeah,
Mhm.
and and this is my life, so it's a do or die for me, right? I'm let's say I'm a client, and I've come to you with the serious problem that I have. And if I go to a doctor, what I try and do is I look at the doctor and say, is he the most experienced doctor in town, right? How
Mhm.
many years of expertise does this doctor have? I get impressed sometimes if I see gray hair in the doctors, because it tells me that the doctor has been through many um, similar surgeries or similar ailments. There's a certain credibility that I associate with that. How do you react to that when it comes to coaching and dealing with clients who say, but isn't he too young to address my problem?
Brilliant question. There's so much to address in that, Rajesh. First, you're talking about heuristics, right? Shortcuts that we make about
Yes.
decisions. Uh, let's go back to that analogy of a surgeon who's started learning surgery at 55, right? It would be such a misunderstanding to attribute their gray hair to their surgical capability if their actual surgical experience is 5 years. They could have been 25 for all you know, with the same amount of skill set, right? Now, that's one variable that people overlook because they misunderstand coaching with mentoring, advising, so on and so forth. That's what plays into that. Other than that, you know that life experience does not automatically translate into learning and insight. Let's say you have been a CEO, and another CEO looks at you and looks at that as a shortcut to thinking that, oh, your experience being a CEO, so you can help me be a CEO better. They have no evidence for whether you have been successful, empathetic, inspiring as a CEO, or you have been an absolute failure. But we ignore all of the nuance to just say, okay, gray hair, CEO title in the past, worthy of coaching a CEO. So it's an innocent misunderstanding. We try to shortcut because we don't want to think too much about it. And in fact, if that is all we want to do, then perhaps the master certified coach credential is a better shortcut to rely on.
That's a good response. Satish, you have something coming up.
Yeah, I'm just curious about, though we have listened to the podcast of Rishi with Phil Goddard, and people have heard about Rishi. I'm still curious to uh, Rishi about how his childhood was and where did he grow up, and what was the experience growing up as a child for you, Rishi?
As a child, I was completely taken over by curiosity. It was in Vizag, Vishakhapatnam. It's on the eastern coast of India. It's a beach city. So I grew up by the beach. I would spend hours by the beach every week, um, doing nothing. So that kind of, I think, early experiences of meditative consciousness were there, or opportunities for that to develop were there. Later on in life, I remembered that we would have a lot of power cuts, and back in the day, we would have candles that we'd light. And because I was a single kid and we didn't do anything when there was a power cut, I would sit and stare at a candle. Later, I realized that's actually a meditation exercise, to stare at a candle flame. So these opportunities were there growing up, that I connected the dots looking backward. But also, I would go to a school where it's a state syllabus school, and we would have these books during summer holidays that we would have to cover and then get them ready for the next academic year. I'd have nothing to do. I would sit and read all the books before the academic year began. So I was really driven by curiosity as a child. And I would ask questions in the class, and I would or sit in the back bench sometimes and just do my own thing, because I already read and understood what the teachers were talking about. So, and they understood it as well. So they let me be. So this kind of very um, curious attitude is what I attribute to my childhood.
How was your family life, Rishi, with your parents and if you have any siblings?
I don't have siblings. I have cousins that we would meet once or twice a year during. Actually, this is that time of the year. It's 14th Jan. It's a festival in India, Pongal. So we would all meet during this time. But otherwise, because I'm a single child, and imagine what parent would have a problem with somebody who always gets 99% on their report card. So
Yeah. So so obviously, very very bright child, lost in his books.
yeah,
Curious, eager, and curiosity, as we know, is the in a sense the heart of coach, being a coach, right? And I guess somewhere, perhaps the signals were already there in your early childhood about where you would eventually land up. Of course, curiosity has expressions in any profession, but the fact when we talk about coaching, we often talk about curiosity as almost like a necessary trait of being a coach and being a learner.
yeah.
So, my question to you is now on awakened leadership. Of course, I think your whole essence, and what you talk about, what you stand for, the brand that you're building for yourself, is about awakened leadership. Talk us a little bit about awakening.
Mhm.
Even before we get into awakened leadership, and the podcast that Satish referred to, I've also gone through that. I was Leon Vanderpool, in his book Shift of Being, talks about awakening as an inner earthquake, and I found that term very interesting. It's an inner earthquake. What was it to you when you felt that sense of awakening? How did that come about for you? Because that obviously set the path for what was going to follow.
Yeah. The word that intuitively came to my mind when I was trying to process that experience for myself was an implosion. It's an inner explosion kind of a thing, right? Um, but also later, as that matured, another word took shape. That was psychological suicide.
Wow.
Right? But that's perhaps a slightly different experience than awakening itself, because that requires a little more mature understanding of what's happening with the ego. I mean, some people call it, for lack of a better word, I'm very careful about using this word enlightenment, but I'm not really a fan of that word, because there's nobody getting enlightened there at all. When you actually go through the experience, it's all absurd. But awakening is basically, people use this word lightly. It's awareness of anything new, waking up. But the way I use it is waking up to the dream, in the sense that, actually, that's a good distinction. Awakening is waking up to the dream, enlightenment would be waking up from the dream. And I talk about awakening because enlightenment is a separate thing, and that's, it happens if it has to happen or not, and it doesn't really matter if it happens. But awakening is when you recognize that everything that you've been taking for granted as an objective fact about your existence is more dreamlike than you would like to admit. And you admit it to yourself by accident or whatever, by grace. And you recognize that, oh shit, I've been dreaming all along. And that nothing is actually fixed. It's all a fluid reality. And what I've been attached to doesn't really make sense. So it's an effortless thing. Awakening is an effortless thing. It sounds like a big deal when I'm talking about it sometimes, but it's the most effortless thing. Think about it. I would invite you, and this is an exercise that I've done a couple of times with my clients earlier. I'd invite you to pick a corner in your room and imagine if you're a dog person or a cat person or whichever pet animal you like. Imagine that's there in the corner of the room, right? You pick a corner, Rajesh, you as well, and imagine tell me what you're imagining there.
I'm imagining a lot of care. I'll keep looking at that corner to say if everything is okay. My dog is fine. I'll be consciously be aware of
Yeah,
there's someone there, and
yeah. So that's your dog and the care involved for you when you think about your dog, right? Satish,
yeah.
what about you?
Yeah, what I'm seeing is in one corner a tennis racket.
Hmm.
I'm passionate about the sport, and I don't know why I see a tennis racket there, but I do. I do
Hmm.
see that.
Hmm. 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 So this is great because Rajesh, you're talking about some pet that you care about. So you're talking about a sport that you like and the representation of that sport there. For somebody else,
Right.
that could be a tiger that they're really afraid
Mm,
of, or a snake
right.
that they're really afraid of. Now, what
Mm,
happens is just as you are experiencing care, Rajesh, somebody would experience fear or paralysis or anxiety. But then the moment you realize that you take one more look at the corner and there's actually nothing there,
mm,
and this, whatever you're experiencing, disappears. Not because you put in any effort into trying to overcome that feeling, but you woke up to the fact that that was just your imagination. That is awakening
mm.
at a much larger, all encompassing scale of your life.
Hmm. And what did you see in your corner?
The only way I can put it is the cosmic joke of life, because for me, my mind shut down for a good 4 or 5 days. I can't really tell how long, but it was somewhere close to a week. And I would sit there and I would just laugh. I would laugh like a crazy guy, and I would just sit and do nothing, and I couldn't even talk to myself because I wouldn't get any thoughts, because my mind just shut down. And I saw the absurdity that no matter the external circumstance, there is always a consciousness of bliss and ecstasy available that is always shrouded by the past replaying into the present, or the future being projected into the present, or like whatever is happening, interpretations, stories. So I woke up from the story of me as a person and my personal life, and I woke up to the continuous realm of existence of which I'm a part.
So, Rishi, I have a question there. So, this is a state that you can go from time to time, or this has happened sometime in the past? And
Great question. To go from time to time implies that it is separated by time, and it's also
Mhm.
a separate state.
Okay.
I want to challenge both those notions, because I want to
Mm,
propose the idea that it's neither a separate state, nor does it require any time to travel between. It is
mm,
just that, again, go back to that tennis racket thing, right? You look at the
right.
tennis racket versus you look at the corner of the wall itself. It doesn't require time, and neither is it a state change. It's just a change in perception. So think about
Mm,
it. If you're looking with your physical eyes, there is no tennis racket there. If you're looking
right.
with your psychological eyes, you see a tennis racket there. There are two
Mm,
realities that are overlapped. Which one are you focusing on at any point in time?
mm. Okay. I'm trying to connect, how what we are speaking right now is connected to the awakening and the awakening leadership that we're going to talk about. Um, let's dig deep in here. I really want to find out. You spoke about psychological suicide and there is implosion, and Rajesh, or you spoke about inner earthquake. I don't know how I'm not, I'm not able to connect all these things together and come to a conclusion of what is actually going on.
Hmm. So if we remove all those terms, right, it's
Mm,
simply put, where is your attention placed at any point in time, right? Because there are so many levels to our existence, our experience of being human. We deal with the outside world, like I have a glass of water here, I can touch this glass of water and I can feel the
mm,
sensation of touch. That's where my focus is. I can
right.
focus on the feeling of my body. I can focus on the thoughts that I'm about to share with you. I can focus on how you're looking on the screen. There are different realities that we are engaging with simultaneously.
Mm,
Similarly, there is a level of reality which is very different from any of these in its fundamental nature, in the sense that it is not defined by any forms. It is a formless reality, which
mm,
kind of encompasses everything. It's the There is a concept in Vedanta called the it's an analogy of the pot and the clay. Is you take
mm,
a pot in your hand and you ask, okay, this is a pot. What is waking up? Waking up is realizing it's clay. And but where is this clay? Well, what you're holding and you're calling a pot is in fact clay. It's just a different aspect of its existence that you're talking about. You're talking about what is it versus how is it used. How is it used as a pot? What it is clay. So these are just being able to perceive different aspects of the same reality. That's what awakening is.
And when that awakening happened for you, it was like you said, implosion and psychological suicide. Did it make you feel that that you're different from the rest, in the sense that the vast majority of people probably won't happen in their lifetime, or will take many
Hmm.
lifetimes, or um, to come to that kind of realization? And even in that sense, it may take even many years of, like they says, the Rishi Muni, and pun not intended, but we'll come to that when I say Rishi Muni. But take years for that kind of awakening to happen. And did it make you feel that, hey, I'm different from the rest, because the others are going about their job, their day to day chores, um, uh, you know, surviving, suffering, running their lives, making ends meet. And here I am getting this completely, um, like you said, laughter, and this unbridled laughter and joy. And did it make you feel that I'm different from the rest?
I'll answer that question, but let me tell you that I did feel different up until that point, because I would be overcome with everybody is going about their life having fun or whatever, and I'm sitting there breaking my head over psychology and philosophy, and I'm like, world is suffering, and I need to figure out a way. What is this? What's the purpose? So there was a point where I felt I was different because I was not able to enjoy my life, and everybody around would party, and I was in my late teens and early 20s at that time. But when the experience actually happened, it was a great equalizer. It showed me that I'm just like everybody else, and it's just that I realized that I'm more like everybody else than anybody else realizes.
Wow.
And when you were going through this particular state, Rishi, what were your parents saying, and how was your routine like? Were you sleeping? Were you having food?
Hmm.
What was going on?
Objectively speaking, my food intake reduced, and I was sleeping lesser. And in the sleep, also, I wouldn't really feel like I've slept. It would be as if I remember vividly that it's as if I'm lying down and looking at my body and then getting up. I wouldn't experience the any dreams or any deep sleep state. It would just be an experience of the physical body as it is. Subjectively, It was more like my body went into an automatic mode of taking care of itself, and it revealed its intelligence to me that I need not worry about when it needs to sleep. I need not worry about its food. It will clearly operate itself if I let it operate itself. So all these ideas of working out and diet and health also, those ideas fell apart for me because I realized that the body has its own intelligence and it can take care of itself if I don't meddle with it.
Hmm. So I'm just thinking now from what you shared with us, you know, moments like these obviously bring into focus this whole identity piece, right? And all of us who are on the self-awareness journey as coaches very often face this question of who am I, right? Um, how would you answer that for yourself? And how do you where do you see your identity getting anchored?
Hmm. To myself, I would simply say that I am, and that is my anchor. I am that I am, right? And I'll expand what those two words mean. Is when I say I am, the am implies a present continuous existence,
Hmm.
right? I implies that I'm aware of this am. I'm aware of this present continuous existence, which means I am conscious of existence.
Hmm.
Consciousness, existence. Sanskrit words are sat and chit.
Hmm.
Existence is sat, chit is consciousness, right?
Right.
And what you experience when you recognize yourself as sat and chit is bliss, ananda. And sat chit
Right.
ananda is the term for
Hmm.
the divine, right?
Yeah.
So that's how I genuinely see myself. But when I talk about it, I've learned that, I remember I was in a coach training back in the day, and I introduced myself as I am existence consciousness bliss in that cohort on the first day, and it
Wow.
was a weird experience.
The person must have said, what?
Right, so
ऐसा
then I
कुछ
learned
आते
that
हैं
that
Bollywood
doesn't go
movies
in
में.
the transactional world. And
Right.
so
Yeah, and there's this Bollywood movie, Three Idiots, where Amir Khan says something, he's an engineer, and they said, कहना क्या चाहते हो? You know,
Hmm.
so have people told you that? What are you really trying to communicate? We don't understand what you're saying.
yeah, at that point, I was kind of overtaken by my own experience, the intensity of this experience that wanted to overflow, that I really had to put in a few years to learn how to temper that and how to learn to articulate that in social settings or in interactions with people in a way that they understand. So I simply now go by the name Rishi. It's the same thing, full circle. Unless somebody pokes into it, you wouldn't really know.
Right.
So I heard in that podcast that about there was also this you could have a parallel option to be a spiritual master. You
Hmm.
could get into that space about being a spiritual teacher and gone on a slightly different path in your life. You chose coaching, and through a series of your corporate life in Deloitte and all that. So maybe we'll just quickly uh, whiz through that. But the fact is that you perhaps had an alternative career path. How did you choose coaching over being a
Hmm.
spiritual master if you had the choice there?
I'll answer that from when that decision happened and how I look at it now. When that decision happened, it wasn't much of a choice really. It was almost like options were presented and taken away by themselves. That okay, from this, I remember particularly that moment when that decision happened. That I was perceiving myself as a continuous field of awareness and existence that's aware of itself, right? And what could I be now? I was already a coach. I was on my journey to becoming an ACC at that time. I was practicing as a coach, but clearly other parts revealed itself. And I remember thinking, and when I say I remember thinking, it's not me doing the thinking as an active thing. It's just that I remember having thoughts which said, you can sit on a hill in silence. That's the most accurately you can communicate this, whatever you're understanding right now. But there's this guy called Ramana who already did that. Or you can
Right.
go around the world and try to expound these teachings. There's this guy called Osho and this other guy called Shankaracharya who already did that. So basically, what the conclusion I've come to is that life is trying to communicate this realization again and again through generations in different forms, depending on the societal structures of that time. And people have assumed different modalities to do that in their own time, and it looked wise to me to take the modality of coaching in our times rather than try to repeat what somebody else has already done in the past. That's how the decision was made looking back. From now I feel that it was also perhaps a result of recognizing that I'm not understanding it completely, because now I don't see any need at all to become a spiritual teacher in that sense, because I don't see any difference between the material world and the spiritual world. I could help you overcome a purely material challenge and it would be the same thing in my mind. At that time, it wasn't. I was still perceiving false duality at a subtle level. And therefore, but there was something in me that kind of perhaps showed me that there is more to understand about this, which prevented me from going into that spiritual path. And I'm grateful that I did not, because now I recognize that there is absolutely no need to. It's similar to, oh, I need to meditate, I need to go to a cave and meditate. But if you go to a cave, you take yourself to the cave, nothing really changes, you're still the same. If you can meditate, you can meditate anywhere. So that idea of non-duality kind of had to mature, and looking back, it has matured now, and I don't see a reason for why it should be different.
I'm still sitting with that thought of getting into the cave. I had this question prepared, in fact, for Rishi. So Rishi, people, at least in reality, we go through ups and downs in our lives, right? It's not a straight line, like where you have ups and you have downs, and this is the way the life is designed. So if you look back at your life so far, what would you say was the lowest point in life?
Couple of low points come to mind. One was when I was a teenager and I was really depressed, and I was wondering what's the point of all of this. I was preparing for my IIT JEE exams at that time, and I was wondering what the hell. I studied everything I did till this point because of curiosity, and now you're asking me to just solve the sum for the sake of the exam without helping me understand what that means. And but I don't seem to have a choice with this, either study or not, and then figure out what to do with your life. So that was a low point. Another low point was when I transitioned out of my career at Deloitte, and I invested into a program which was missold to me as an advanced coach training, which turned out to be a scam. And I lost a major chunk of my savings. And then after that, the pandemic hit. And then, so I was quite unsure of if I had taken a wrong decision about quitting the job. That was a low point, but that low point lasted for a very short time. I think the second low point was barely a couple of weeks, and it turned around. Now, of course, I'm just glossing over this. In that moment, it felt very intense, and in that moment, it felt like there was no way out of this. But looking back, there's always a way out of it, because it's just a matter of perception.
Right.
I want to jump in here and ask you this question linked to what Satish asked you about the low point. When you reach that low point, what would be your options? Would you self-coach, given where you were, or you would seek help and talk to someone? And who would that person be? Not just the name of the person, but would it be somebody, a close family member, a friend, or a fellow coach? How did you figure that out for yourself in your low moments?
Funny, just earlier this week, I was talking to a friend who was going through a breakup, and he asked me the same question in a different way. Like, how do you get out of something that's really a sad moment for you? I don't self coach. What I do is I allow the emotion to express itself fully, and that could mean crying if that's what comes. That could mean sitting and doing nothing if that's what comes. But I would experience the emotion with as much awareness and focus as I can, without trying to run away from it or suppress it or get rid of it. And when that happens, the movement of the emotion is accelerated. and the time taken for it to move out of your system and for you to regain stability is very small. So I think it's radical acceptance in a way. When I'm
Right.
forgetting that this is the way in the first place, then I would reach out to one of my coaches. And I've talked about some of the coaches who have really helped me in my life, right? Michael Neal is one of them. Dominic Scafidi is the one that I'm actively in conversation with. He's a master certified coach in Canada. So I would reach out to one of them, and because we all share similar understandings, and they've mentored me over the years, and we have a shared foundation. They've also had these experiences that we are talking about now. So it's very quick for them to exactly pinpoint in one phrase what's going on, and they thanks for reminding. So it's simple as that.
I have a question here, Rajesh. Uh, Rishi talks about Michael Neal and some coach in Canada.
Yeah.
We are all coaches practicing in India. Normally, we don't connect to people abroad, right? So I'm curious to find out, how did you start connecting with people overseas, particularly this some of the
Yeah, the
very
three
well-known
key,
coaches.
yeah,
Yeah,
the three key
yeah.
influencers that you
Yep.
speak a lot about on your website and blog.
Yeah, three P influences precisely. So how did it first happen? I think I was reading this quite famous book now, Prosperous Coach, Rich Litwin and Steve Chandler. And Rich talks about Michael being his coach. And then that's how I looked Michael up. And then around the pandemic, Michael opened up his inner circle, and it was all remote. So I got an opportunity. The timing was just perfect for me at that point. Other than that, also, I feel like in India, I tried reaching out to a lot of coaches. When I started out as a coach, nobody responded to me. People were very judgmental.
Ah.
So I was like, okay, I mean, and I know we know Indian culture, how it is. It's slightly more hierarchical and slightly more, conformist, collectivist culture. So when I reached out to these coaches outside of India, they did not see me as somebody who was trying to be a coach or a young guy or anything. They actually saw me for the pure potential that I am. So naturally, there was a gravitation for me towards that direction. When later on I started interacting with Indian coaches after I got my ACC, I've realized that they would still not be okay with the idea that I'm a coach. They would still try to think that there is a right way that they know about how to do things. They would think that, oh, this is how you should think about these things. And I would talk to these other people in the West, and they would and this is not about East and West, this is about spiritual maturity, right?
Yeah.
They would really try and identify what I was talking about as, okay, this is one way of looking at it, this is another way of looking at it. So you talk about abstract concepts rather than rights and wrongs. So naturally I would gravitate towards those people, and I would obviously invest more amount because it's all dollars and pounds and all of that, but it felt like a justified investment for me. And if you look back now, I wrote an article that I've shared with you, Rajesh, about a snapshot of my practice. I don't mention any of the ICF coach trainings I've done. So that's how insignificant of a part this has become in my journey so far.
Mm, mm. So, this whole bit that we've been talking about so far is about awakening, and we still haven't come to awaken leadership, which we will do in some time. The other key word for most of us, and not I'm not just saying the coaching fraternity, for people, which sometimes seems very daunting, is purpose. What is your purpose in life, right? The why.
Right.
Simon Sinek said it, and everybody's then been running around your ikigai, and so the whole world seems to be turning on its ankles, saying, "What's my purpose? What's my purpose?" And that can create some amount of frustration in life. Like, I don't know. I'm just sort of going through life. I don't know where I'm headed. I can't define my purpose. What's your take on this? How important is it for you, for anyone, to know in the early on in their life about what's my purpose? I see a lot of youngsters, for instance, I sort of resonate with what I've read somewhere, that purpose finds you rather than you find purpose. They try out a lot of new things. They don't know where they are headed, but somewhere there's a trust that uh, they will find their way through, right? Rather than being crystal clear, like you were, for instance, early on in your career, about what you wanted in your life. So, what would be your take on this whole pursuit of purpose?
Yeah. Actually, let me jump into that assumption that I was. It looks like I was. I wasn't. What I was really sure about is a way of living life. I wasn't sure about what it would lead me to. But I was convinced that if I followed that way of living life, whatever it would lead me to would be good enough for me. And so it just happened to be in the form of a professional leadership coach, but it could have been otherwise, and I would have been equally happy about it. Is Think about it like this: if you are saying you are consciousness and your existence, and you're just not able to perceive it at this moment, but that's actually how you are, and we can help you recognize that, then you wouldn't run after anything in life from a place of lack. You wouldn't want to get anything because you know that there is nothing other than you for you to get, really. And so you would then look for a different operating system. Okay, if I don't need to get anything, then why would I do anything at all? Why wouldn't I just sit and do nothing? And that trope about vacationing on the beach, sipping cocktails, right? Hedonistic treadmill, you'll get really bored of it very quickly, and you'll be wondering, what do I do? But that's a false understanding. When you are so lost in running after things in the material world, whatever, success, promotion, money, this, that, we would think the ideal case is an overcompensation for this is do nothing. But what happens is, when you are actually awakening, you recognize that there's nothing lacking, you don't really need anything, and you recognize the fact of your mortality, that you don't know how long you're going to be alive, and life is really limited, and what you want out of it. You would see that you would always want to do something that is effortless, something that doesn't feel like a lot of work and effort. It could actually involve a lot of work, but it wouldn't feel like effort. Something that gives you joy, something that feels natural to you, doesn't feel like you're acting and pretending to be somebody else. So you would prioritize being yourself and ease and all of that. Out of that, some things will come naturally to you that are different from what would come naturally to me. And they would shape what you do and what your purpose ends up being. But you wouldn't care about what that ends up being, because along the way, having so much fun, you couldn't bother about how would it end up being. It's like a painter or a musician who's lost so much in that act itself, that it's for the
Yeah.
outsiders to recognize the output.
I don't know. I have a relevant question here, but I'm running a community and I teach people. And recently, we had a masterclass around how to find one's purpose, and I did a 60-minute session, and I facilitated people to find their purpose, and I gave them spaces of 5 minutes each for these three different things. One, the experiences that you want to have, and two, that the growth that you want to have in your life, and three, what you want to contribute to the world. So around these three, I gave them 5 minutes each and asked them to jot down, what is instantly coming to your mind, and ask them to, at the end of it, ask them to pick top three and meditate around it, and you'll find your purpose. That's what I told them. But I also tell people that, uh, look for things or people or experiences what gives you goosebumps. When you have these goosebump moments in your
Hmm.
life, right? That's what your soul wants to do.
Hmm.
uh, so I have this question for you, Rishi. What gives you goosebumps?
Hmm. That's a fantastic indicator, by the way. What gives you goosebumps is a good indicator for what your purpose wants to be, because it's always the
Hmm.
path of highest excitement for you, highest aliveness for you. You want to feel alive
Hmm.
while you're doing this whole thing, rather than feeling dead and grudging and getting through something, and whatever you get is not worth it anymore, because it's
Right.
the promise fulfilled is never as fulfilling as the promise itself.
Yeah.
So for me, what gives me goosebumps is what I'm doing now, right? And
Hmm.
again, this is a slight misinterpretation of the question, because what gives me goosebumps is less important than the fact that it gives me goosebumps. Whatever gives me goosebumps should be the thing. And if I look at my own life, whatever gives me goosebumps, coaching gives me goosebumps, writing gives me goosebumps. That's why I keep writing articles about this. Speaking gives me goosebumps. You can see that I'm coming alive in this conversation. Right? Dancing gives me goosebumps. I learn Argentine tango. I dance bachata, kizomba. Earlier in my life, playing the guitar and the bansuri, the Indian flute, gave me goosebumps. Painting gives me goosebumps. There are paintings all over my place that I've painted in the past. So it keeps changing with time is my point. So not get fixated on the specific form of it, but the fact that it gives me goosebumps in the present moment.
So it's not.
Just to follow up with that,
Yeah.
sorry, please go ahead,
No, no,
Rajesh. Yeah.
sorry, Satish. Yeah, go ahead.
Just to follow up with for that question, on the one side, these are things that gives you goosebumps. Is there anything that you're really afraid of in life?
Well, see, yes and no. In the sense that if you point a gun at me, will I be frightened? Yes, obviously, right? But also, when you're seeing, is there anything you are afraid of? We have to be clear about what you are talking about. What is the you are referring to? Would I be afraid about my physical life as I know it ending? Yes, in a biological sense, it is hardwired into thing. In a psychological sense, I can bring radical acceptance to it and not be afraid of it. And I have an example of it. I was in Solan in Himachal Pradesh in a university. I was there for a conference, and we were walking to one of my cottages. It's on the hill, and it's middle of the night after the sessions, and I heard a noise in the woods. It's in the mountains in the Himalayas, and instinctively the thought was maybe there's a tiger or something there. And the immediate next thought was, if there is, great, I've had a great life. I'm ready for it. It's the immediate next thought was acceptance that if there is indeed a tiger, I'm ready to die because I'm that's what it's meant to be. Like I would rather spend the last moments in acceptance and contentment and joy about the life I've lived than fear. And when I remember my mortality, fear is always overridden by joy about life.
Most people, when they come face to face with the tiger, or they sense some danger like this, right? Their cortisol or adrenaline or whatever rushes up, and you choose to run, right? And there is this person who wants to accept that whatever has happened in my life, and I'm ready to go now if this is the moment. I don't know how you came about such a realization or understanding about life.
I mean, think about it logically. It's not like you have much of a choice. Might as well accept it.
Yeah.
I just maybe this is probably a time to change gears a little bit
Yeah.
and about get into the space of leadership, right? And I want to start probably about us as children, and I'm referencing something that I read about in your article, that we are told that you know this child is a good problem solver, right? And he's a leader. I mean, he's a leader in the making. Like he knows how to lead, take charge, solve a problem. And that gets conditioned into our being to say, if I really want to succeed and I want to become a leader, I need to be good at problem solving. And that sort of becomes a default sort of wiring, that leader hai to matlab काम है problem solve करना, right? And then you realize, and as I read about in your piece, that that is just the what, right? It's not who you are. It's just what you do well, and that's a skill that you learn as a problem solver. You take good decisions and solve a problem. Even as coaches, I think we go the other way, that we are saying that our job is not to solve the problem, right? I mean that you trust the autonomy of your client to find the solution to yourself. But a lot of in the early stages of your maturing as a coach, the first thing is to dive in and to say, okay, can I solve the problem for my client, right? And then we give it fancy names like taking a hat off and taking this hat off and taking that hat on, put that on, become a mentor and coach. What's your take on this? Where does this whole thing about solving a problem become our default uh, system
You're asking me in the context of me being a coach or
of
in.
leadership, of emergent leadership, and therefore where is that today? In this whole awakened leadership
Yes,
piece that we are going to
yes,
now move into. What does
yes,
what does solving a problem? Why is that the be all and end
yeah.
all of it?
It's a good place to start this inquiry because it must be obvious to any leader at this point in the world that even if they tried to solve the problems, they would fail miserably because the world is more complex than you can figure out the cause and effect for you to solve the problems in the first place. right? So this idea that I will solve a problem, uh, it's not a leadership idea. We must understand it's just you following your conditioning. You're not being a leader when you're following your conditioning. You're simply another follower to whatever has happened outside of your, will and intention in your life. That's not a vacant leadership. That's unconscious. That's just somebody in a leadership title and pay and role, rather than leadership in general. And when they tried solving problems, obviously they would fail. And but people have egos and they don't want to give up so easily, so they would put up a fight against reality, and reality always wins. I can assure you that. Okay? So at some point, sooner than later, you would have to accept that I'm not able to solve these problems. Heck, I'm not able to understand the problems in the first place. And that point of realization comes, and the more mature the leader is, the quicker that realization comes. And you'll be surprised, Rajesh, that most of the people I work with are in their 40s and 50s. Very few are in their 30s. One is in their 20s, right? Because the more experience life seems to give you, the easier it is to accept that it's not all in my control. I need to get help and figure this out better. And so you have to step back from that identity of being a problem solver, because you're just failing at it. So life, it's, again, this is effortless, right? Life will make sure you get the message, and it would try to do it in the best possible way for you. It's not that you need to figure it out yourself. And so whenever you get that recognition, you can say, okay, then what else is possible if I'm not able to solve the problem? Okay, understanding is possible. So then we inquire, then we understand how reality is playing out, how you are playing out as one of the aspects of that reality. What you're calling a problem, what is that in fact? How are you knowing that it is a problem? So we get into the field of epistemology, into philosophy and subjective experiences. And we try to reconcile it with what they're perceiving as objective data in the world. And from there, something new emerges that hasn't emerged yet. Because when you are conducting that inquiry, you are no longer operating from your conditioned space. So you have access to a different capacity, which will give you new insights, which will lead you to a different action or a different situation where the problem simply does not exist the way you were perceiving that it existed.
Yeah, I just want to interject, if you may.
Hmm.
The rewards are linked to your problem solving abilities, right? The bigger, the more complex the problem, the bigger the rewards for finding a way out, right?
Hmm.
And I hear what you're saying, that the problem itself may not be the problem, or the understanding of it, and which is why knowing versus not knowing, or being comfortable with not knowing,
Yeah.
is probably a better strategy than saying that I know, and I therefore put more and more effort in the knowing, because I
Yeah.
know that that will help me solve the problem.
Yeah. Yeah. And let me address that piece about rewards, because that's kind of the external factor influencing somebody's
Yeah.
tendencies, right? We must understand that this system of rewards and punishments is what has led us to this current social, economic, political situation in the world, right? So we can't assume that, okay, the system is right and we need to navigate it. We must question the system, because the system doesn't exist outside of processes and abstract concepts in our collective identity. When you recognize that we are the agents that are propagating the system, and when we see things differently, the system itself is different as a result. So I think there is a willingness to challenge the status quo that comes with awakened leadership, and but not for the heck of a rebel for the sake of being a rebel. It's more about a challenge to the status quo that emerges out of a more precise understanding of what's going on, rather than a blind conformity.
So tell us 2 or 3 things about awakened leadership. If one were to say, let me understand what this means, what would be the 3 things that you would use to explain what awakened leadership is?
Let me think about this. I've not really articulated in three terms. Okay. I'll give you a few outside pointers, but I would give you a few pointers for the subjective, for the leader themselves to check within themselves. From the outside, it would look like the ability to operate with calm, centered stability amidst infinite complexity. And I call it infinite complexity because it really is infinite. Um, it looks like not anxious to solve the problems, but holding the space for the solutions to emerge through collective awareness. rather than imposing that my whatever I believe to be the solution is the solution. Right? It looks like creating leaders rather than followers, and this is a big misunderstanding about leadership, is that for you to be a leader, others have to follow you. That's not the case. For you to be a leader, you have to inspire others to be leaders themselves in their own lives. That's awakened leadership as opposed to traditional leadership from the outside. But if you are a leader and you are wondering where you are in this journey of awakened leadership, you can check in and see, am I doing what I'm doing because I'm inspired to do this? Or because I think I should do it because I will get something else in return? Right? So that's a good indicator of whether you're practicing awakened leadership or normal leadership. Another thing is, if at this point in my life, there's an opportunity cost to anything that I'm doing. There's so many things that I'm not doing. Would I rather be doing what I'm doing than everything else that I could have been doing? That's a good indicator for awakened leadership. Am I experiencing aliveness? Am I coming alive, or am I feeling dead inside while I'm engaging in this? That's an indicator for awakened leadership. And you don't need to change what you're doing per se. You can come alive doing what you're doing, or you can be dead doing what you're doing. It's a state of consciousness that you can access. But people misunderstand that and say, okay, I'm not coming alive doing this, let me do something else. But they'll equally find dissatisfaction in that new thing. And so they'll keep stumbling upon one thing over another, one thing after another. But you must recognize that this is a shift in being. It's not really change of circumstance.
I've read about the article that you've written on navigating infinite complexity, right? And there you talk about this paradoxes, right? That any person goes through. There are two sides of always. Suppose a project leader, on the one side he has to look at the project has to be completed. On the other side, you have people to manage, and similarly, there are so many paradoxes that we face in our daily lives, right? So from the standpoint of awakened leadership, how does one go about, you know, solving these paradoxes?
You don't solve these paradoxes. You cannot possibly solve these paradoxes. This is the paradox of existence, right? We must understand what this paradox means at its essence. Because to even ask the question of how do we solve it implies that we do not understand the paradox fully. Existence itself is duality and polarity in the way we experience it. There's always self contradictions that are inside our being. We want to do nothing, we also want to do something. We want one thing, but we also want another thing. Right? We want to be successful, get the fame, the title, the pay. We also want to be peaceful and calm. These seem irreconcilable at the face. Right? These are not meant to be solved. These are meant to be held in awareness. What that means is you acknowledge what people, when they try to solve it, what they do is they quickly realize they can't solve it and they collapse into one of them. What they do is they shut away one part of it and only fixate on one part of it. So somebody would say, a good example is somebody from Wall Street, for example, right? Not to make it a generalization, but in terms of statistical majority, they would completely shut away peace, calm, and all of these spiritual aspects for material success. 1.5 million, not enough. I could have done better. 2.5 million the next year. So you collapse into one of these dualities. That's the only way you can solve them. But if you can acknowledge both possibilities, what happens is you transcend. When you acknowledge a contradiction, you transcend the contradiction, you go to a meta level. It no longer looks like something that needs solving. It looks like you can enjoy it in a way, in the sense that, I'll give you a simple analogy. You go to a movie theater, you're watching the movie on the screen. You know that that's just a screen of LED lights, or a projector onto a blank slate. But you're also enjoying the content of the movie. You're letting it move you into tears or anger or whatever emotion the movie is evoking in you, right? You're able to experience that fully without letting the understanding that it's just a screen bother you. The question of solving, how do we solve the fact that it's just a screen and it's not real? How absurd would that question sound to somebody who's in a movie theater? What are you talking about? I'm here to enjoy the damn movie. That's
Yep.
awakened leadership.
Yeah, Rishi, you spoke about the screen, right, and the projection, and this gave me connected me immediately to the workshop that we had recently that I attended, a one-day mastery workshop, which exactly had the same example. And probably the good time to ask you about what is inner mastery according to you, and how do we know that we are on the path of inner mastery?
I must start off by saying that this word seems a little problematic to me, the inner mastery, because
Yeah.
people can easily take it upon their own ego. Oh,
Hmm.
like I'm engaging in inner mastery, or I'm an inner master, I have inner mastery, which should be the exact opposite of what that word intends to point to, is that you get rid of your ego and its effects as much as possible. um, so how would you know you're on the path to inner mastery if you're not bothered about taking the title of being on the path to inner mastery? If you're simply curious about yourself, you want to use your life, the time you have, to experience yourself more fully, to understand what's going on with this experience that you've been given, to inquire into this, to enjoy this, to find meaning in it, to share the feeling that you get as a result of that with other people, then you are on the path to inner mastery. And what is this inner mastery? It is simply the ability to navigate different levels of consciousness. We have access to several states of consciousness. Just like I pointed out, we can access focus on different aspects of reality in the outside world. We can also focus on different aspects or layers of reality in our inner experience. And when I call it inner experience, it's a misnomer, because there's no such thing as inside and outside. From the ultimate standpoint, it's all inside, because everything I'm talking about is in my awareness. It's in my awareness that I can experience and talk about things. So in this awareness, there are several aspects of experience of a human being that exist. There's the psychological layers, the five sheets of consciousness that Indian philosophy talks about. There are several interpretations of this, but you can, if you can navigate freely, because the idea is freedom. The highest ideal of philosophy and spirituality has always been freedom, and not some kind of an escape. It's freedom to, not freedom from. It's not freedom from suffering, it's freedom to suffer happily. And that distinction is the understanding, and being able to live that distinction is inner mastery.
And I also I always sort of get very intrigued when I see on people on LinkedIn and other places that they put a number to the impact that they want to create. Right, part of also this whole quest for mastery and to make a difference to the world. People say touching so many lives,
Hmm.
or
Yep.
there's always a metric against, because the world sort of seems to respond well to metrics, right, or even social change, and some of these big companies that sponsor, and the Gates Foundation, and everywhere there's a thing of scaling up, that
Hmm.
it's not just that you're doing a job of making a difference to people's lives.
Hmm.
Satish does a fantastic job through Matram and what he's doing, but somewhere I feel a lot of times it is about scalability, and how do you really
Yeah.
quantify that big impact that you're having in the world? How important is that for
Hmm.
you as well, and in general about change makers? Since
Yeah.
our podcast is about changepreneurs, and I think this is
Yeah.
a slight detour from what we were talking about.
Yeah. Now, this is a good inquiry, because this allows me the opportunity to kind of distinguish between two separate things. The numbers can happen, they need not happen. It's not important to fixate on the numbers. It's important to fixate on from where the numbers are coming from. Um, but in large part, the phenomenon you're referring to of people coming up with metrics because the world seems to reward it, they are living in a reported on world, where they're looking at the outside world, they're reporting on what the world is saying okay to, and they're just reproducing that. It's a life of recycling. It's not a life of creativity. It's not a life of inspired creation. In a world where you understand that reported world does not exist in itself as a separate entity. Everybody is creating that in real time through their beliefs, through their insistence on certain things. Then you recognize that you're always participating in this creative act as well. And then you can create whatever you're inspired to create without any bother about what the world seems to want or accept, or all of that. So I think that shift must happen. When that shift happens, if you're inspired to create metrics, if it looks fun to you, sure, go for it. But I can tell you 99% of the time it doesn't, because you will also recognize that it's just a made up target that I'm setting for the heck of it, and you wouldn't be really attached to that number. And if you're really finding some kind of a, people have quotes on their walls, it reminds them of some things sometimes. Sure, if in moments of forgetfulness, these metrics can help you remind, but that'll be the scope of the usefulness of the metrics. When people do not have the shift of understanding that they are creating their reality, they're living in a world that they think is the static world out there that's being reported, then they would come up with a lot of different things to manage. And it's also an ego game, because it's a one-upmanship. Oh, I want to impact 100,000 people in
Yeah.
my life. And grand visions and grand declarations, people want to appear bigger than they actually are. All of these
Right.
ego factors play in. So that's what I think about it. It requires a shift in paradigm about how we are perceiving reality.
Yeah.
Talking about numbers and metrics, Rishi, MCC, getting to MCC is about achieving certain number of hours before you can call yourself as MCC, right? And I've read in one of your blog posts that you would coach in midnight, talking to the peer coaches in North America, Canada, and places like that, in Europe. And during daytime, you were saying that you are reading, researching, reading philosophy, and so many other things that you're interested about. So in this whole process of this numbers getting to some level of success, right? I'm not really sure what the question I'm getting to, but were you also driven by numbers to get to this MCC level at a certain point in time?
I can tell you a clear no, but I was driven. But there is something else that I was driven by. Otherwise, I wouldn't have gotten to where I did. Right? I was driven by my desire to translate what I was perceiving as a spiritual reality into the coaching form, because I could see that they were a little disconnected. Coaching has the potential for something really big, but it is stuck in some misunderstandings about how to coach and what it means to be a coach. And perhaps it's a useful overcompensation, because in North America, where this whole thing originated, people were probably too reliant on giving advice and being experts, because it's an individualistic culture, that they had to overcompensate with the core competencies, saying, oh, no advice, or all of that. That's my theory about this. But I was driven by reconciliation, you can say, reconciliation of my spiritual understanding of the insight with the core competencies of ICF and how coaching works. And I wanted to get to a point where I could genuinely say that coaching is an absolutely good modality that I've picked, as opposed to what we talked about earlier, spiritual preaching and teaching and so on, to kind of do this work. So that's what I was driven by. And like I said, North America connection is simply because people in India were not very conducive to the idea, and people there were very encouraging. So
I have a follow up to that, Rishi. I see in your website on top, it says, I'm not your usual coach. What does it mean?
Rajesh is what did you think, Rajesh, before I answered?
Why am I being put on the spotlight here? No, I love what you wrote below that. Yeah. So I'm in agreement. Yeah, but I think I'm interested why he said that I'm the unique. I'm curious here now. what made you write the headline? I'm not your usual coach. Is that an implicit uh, belief there that there's a usual way of coaching that exists, and I want to change the course of that?
Yeah.
I'm not part of the herd. Were you trying to make a sort of bigger statement through that line?
Um, let me see. I've not thought about this because I've written this statement probably like 5 years ago now. And
Yeah, so
I haven't.
being from the communication space, I was reading a lot more into the words.
So there is a usual way of coaching. The usual way of coaching, and my company is called Paradigm Shift for a reason,
Yes.
right?
Mhm.
The usual way, and let's not even get into the non-professional coaching space. I'm completely ignoring that
Yeah,
be
yeah.
coaching at all. In the ICF
Yeah.
and the professional leadership executive coaching space, usual way is we take the contents of your mind, we try to poke into the contents of your mind, we try to rearrange the pieces, and you'll probably see something new or something different that you've been blind to.
Right.
And so new awareness will come that you will try and do something. That is the max that coaching has gone to, from the time of simple behavioral change and Marshall Goldsmiths and all of that. Just pure behavioral change, versus what is now being called transformational coaching is in my opinion also a recycling of the contents of the psyche. And it has, and the few coaching modalities that go beyond that into spiritual space, they risk um, pathologizing the material world. And they talk about the inner journey of the leader, they talk about inner mastery, as if there is an inner world that is separate from the outer world. There is no inner mastery anybody can achieve without outer mastery, and I've learned this in my own personal experiences. There's a saying, right? If you think you're enlightened, go live with your parents, you'll know how enlightened you are. So it's always the outer world that is reflecting whatever mastery you claim to be having. In that sense, when I say I'm not your usual coach, I'm not interested in the contents of your mind. I am interested in you who is dealing with the contents of your mind. I'm not interested in confusing you with whatever little identity you present yourself to be, that, oh, I am the CEO, I'm the vice president, I am this, I'm that. I'm not interested in playing at that level. I'm not interested in saying, given that you are the CEO, and given that there is so much responsibility, and given that there is so much stress that you're experiencing, what can we do? I'm not interested in that game. I'm interested in questioning, is that even a given? What makes you think that is a given? What makes you think you are the CEO? What else are you other than the CEO? What makes you think the stress is a given factor of your role? What if that wasn't? Because if it was, then you're stuck. I'm sorry. Best you can do is try to manage it. But what if there is a larger possibility? So I'm interested always in taking a meta level stance in my coaching. That's what makes me say I'm not your usual coach. And from the ICF standpoint also, the competencies talk about inquiring into values, beliefs, thought processes, feelings. These are all contents of consciousness. They're not consciousness itself. They're specific forms in which consciousness manifests itself. So I'm not interested in the specific forms. I'm interested in where these forms are arising out of, and what these forms are made of, what the mechanics of this whole process is. So in other words, I'm interested in your entire reality rather than the specific part that you think is the problem in your reality, given that everything else is the way it is. Because in my
So does
mind,
that make you
yeah.
exclusionary? Sorry to interrupt. Does that
Yes.
make you exclusionary? So you're saying that, look, if you are evolved enough to have reached a
Mhm.
certain point where you can think of consciousness, it's the time. It's only then we can meet. But a lot of
Mm.
people come and say, look, I just have a problem. I have a problem with my boss,
Yes.
or they distill it down to very everyday problems, or I don't know how to manage my team given the fact that I'm growing very fast for a
Yep.
startup company. They have very tangible problems, right? They don't
Yes.
have higher order
Yes.
evolutionary issues to talk to.
Yes.
How would you
Right.
how would you get that duality?
Fantastic question. It's not exclusionary, because if you look at my actual professional practice, most conversations revolve around the practical things. Like, Yesterday, I was having a coaching conversation. We were talking about, and this is a theme over the last week or two. Most conversations have been revolving around performance appraisals because that's season in the corporate world, right?
Right.
And everybody has a different challenge and angle to come at performance appraisal, but it's purely about performance appraisals as a topic. So clearly, it's not a higher order problem that I'm dealing with, but there is a possibility of a higher order conversation that I'm always inviting. And this also ties back to whose agenda is the coaching. Is it my agenda as a coach, or is it their agenda? Because if I say that, oh, you only have to talk about this, then it's my agenda. And if I'm saying there's no difference between these different, apparently different worlds, then I shouldn't have any problem engaging in a purely practical conversation, because I'm claiming that there's no difference where you start the inquiry. And how far deep you want to go into that inquiry is depending on your own desires. But there is a possibility beyond what you have imagined. And I want to constantly highlight that possibility is available, because a lot of clients come with different levels of readiness. It shouldn't be the case that the client is ready for a higher order problem and the coach is not. So I want to always highlight the possibility that the coach is, I'm ready to meet you wherever you are, no matter where you are. And there's no cap on where I can meet you because I'm not capable. That's what I'm trying to point out.
Hmm. So, Satish, maybe I think time to make it a little more lighter. And I'm sure you have your fun questions handy. I just have one question before we get into that. How do you see the difference between presence and executive presence? Right. There is the presence, as we all understand as coaches, and everything about coaching is about really presence, right? And there's this whole thing today that I see, and I work in this area as well. People saying, I want to up my executive presence because I want to go up the ladder. And that's become a necessary trait today, that leaders need to have executive presence.
Yeah.
How do you see the difference between the
Yes.
two?
This again points back to reported on reality versus created reality. Leaders look at what other people are talking about and then they say, I want that because that's what is being rewarded and so on. I fundamentally do not see any difference in pure. I do see a difference in how it's being talked about. Is executive presence has become some sort of an ego circus sometimes, right? I don't think that is a right understanding of executive presence. I think presence is presence, and there are different use cases of presence. If I'm using presence to coach, I have coaching presence. If I'm using presence to paint, I have painting presence. And how presence shows up in these two actions are very different. What presence is focused upon when I'm painting is very different from what presence is focused upon when I'm coaching. When I'm being an executive leader, what presence is focused upon is different. But to have executive presence as a manifestation in the practical world, you must tap into presence as a manifestation of your consciousness. Without that, it's all trying to pretend and trying to put up a show without actually having substance.
That's a beautiful explanation. Thank you for that.
So, Rajesh, I necessarily don't have some fun questions to end with, but I do have a few curious questions.
Yeah.
Rishi, you spoke about people impacting your life. You've had some incredible teachers, some mentors, and some top-notch coaches. So, if you were to pick the top two from this list of people that had huge impact in your life, who would you pick and why?
In people that I've met in my real life, the specific coaches and mentors, or
Yeah.
I wouldn't know by what factor to pick, but I can tell you by the intensity of present day experience. Yes, I would. Michael Neal is one of them. I keep talking about him because it was in conversation with him that I've had this final realization. And I remember going back to him a couple of years later, and he very wisely, warmly said, "Welcome back. Time to engage back in the world." And so, like somebody that I see as definitely embodying and living this. My coach, mentor, supervisor, whatever you can call, because these labels kind of dissolve when you're actually in the conversation, right? Right now is Dominic Scafidi, with whom I'm exploring the practical world and navigating the practical world from a spiritual understanding. I think he has had a lot of impact in the sense that I'll tell you why. My PCC credential, when I applied for it, he made a big difference for me because My PCC mentor did not have any spiritual understanding the way I understood it. He was insisting on practical markers for clearing the exam. And my curiosity, like I said, was reconciling these two worlds. And so Dominic was the one who was a step ahead of me in being able to see that they can be reconciled. And so he helped me perceive the competencies in a way that helped me see no difference in between how I coach and what I understand to be true. And since then we've come a long way. We've recorded some conversations, we've explored this idea of coaching versus principles versus truth and spiritual understandings. um, I remember having a conversation sometime a couple of months ago with him where I was on a video call and I burst into tears because the fact that there's going to probably be a time where I'm around but he is no longer around because he's much elder. He's in his I think 60s now or whatever.
Mhm.
Hit me, and I was like, oh shit, you're not going to be around for me to have conversations with all the time for my life. And we acknowledge the fact that life needs to keep refreshing and renewing
Right.
itself. So by the intensity of that emotional experience, I can tell that he's another person that has really influenced me.
So, how these two people are different from the other folks that you see?
Not for everybody, right? Phil is a great guy. I really respect and love Phil. Another coach of mine, Vin Morgan, he's a fantastic person. I love him. And Vin showed me that you can be absolutely human with all your flaws. There's no pretense of some awakened personality. Awakening is involving accepting all the normalcies of life. So it's not so much of a difference. I think everybody manifests, whoever taps into presence manifests it differently based on their own life experiences. I talk about things in a particular way. Michael talks about them in a particular different way. Dominic talks about them in a different way. My own personal experiences shape the unique point of view that I have in how I am communicating what I'm communicating. Although what I'm communicating is probably the same as what anybody else is. So it's just that my particular tendencies seem to fit best with these people's tendencies and how they're pointing. And I can easily listen to it's fit chemistry, you can say.
Okay. So I'm going to ask you now when was the last time Rishi let his hair down?
Hair.
Really let his hair down.
Can you explain what that metaphor means? I don't understand.
I'm not explaining anything. I'm
I
just
don't know
saying,
what letting my
in
hair down.
the way normal, usual people let their hair down, was it at a
Oh,
dancing
like
while you were
that.
doing
Yeah.
it?
Okay. Yeah.
Let
So
your hair down. Yeah.
let my hair
Oh,
down. Yeah. Um.
this was not a philosophical or spiritual
Yeah. It's
question.
very practical. When was the last time, right?
He has a curly hair, and
Yeah. Very difficult to
not
let.
necessarily it may go down.
I'm like, do I have long hair? I don't. That's what I was wondering. uh, I think it happens pretty much on a regular basis. Like every morning, I wake up, I take some time making coffee and sitting and doing nothing. Um, that's a time for me to really let my hair down. And when I say let my hair down, the way I interpret that is let my ego down, because clearly I am operating from an ego. If I wasn't operating from an ego, I wouldn't be able to have this conversation with you today. An ego is a necessary part of the transactional reality. There's no condemning it as such. So letting my hair down is for me sinking into that space of no ego and allowing that to recreate the ego only to the extent and only in a way that is useful for the specific conversation. Clearly, this is not the kind of ego I would bring to a coaching conversation, because there I wouldn't be talking and sharing about all of these things, right? Clearly, this wouldn't be the ego that I would have in a bar
I
or a
didn't even
pub,
talk about coaching. I just said when did
right?
you
So
have a wine night out
oh, wild
or a
night
wine
out.
day? Yeah.
Sunday, this Sunday, I was at a dance socials and I was dancing all night. So it was this Sunday that I had a
Uh-huh.
wild night out. But wild night out doesn't include alcohol for me as much as it includes forgetting everything else and being there with whoever was there with me.
Okay. If Rishi were to find a soulmate or a partner, would he go on a dating site or would he rely more on one-to-one detailed conversation?
One-to-one detail for sure. Like I can tell you an example. Sometime earlier this year, I was on the beach with another friend of mine, and we were walking on the beach. And I live in Goa, so it's like accessible beaches and all. and I found these couple of women playing frisbee. And I told to this person, hey, one of them seems very interesting to me, something about her energy, right? And then I bumped into another friend of mine. So now there's three of us, and she came in and she was like, hey, what are you up to? And I was like, I was just telling this other friend that, there's two women playing their frisbee or whatever. Find one of their energy very interesting. The next thing that happens is the frisbee falls on my feet, and then that person comes and picks up the frisbee, and it's a polite nod or whatever, and goes about. And this friend of mine asked, why didn't you have a conversation? You said you find that person interesting. And I said, I find that person's energy interesting, but not interesting enough to motivate me into a conversation. If it has to happen effortlessly, it'll happen effortlessly. Next thing happens, frisbee comes and falls on my feet again, and this time we say, you know what, we should talk. And then it so happens we're both in the same coffee shop, and we end up having a long conversation. So that's how it works out for me. Presence always gives clues about what your immediate next step is. And when you're not attached to the outcome and you're just following those intuitive nudges of presence, you will end up having a good experience. That's how I approach this.
So is Rishi a head person or a heart person?
Now I think I'm a more integrated person. I used to be a head person earlier in my life. For the longest time, I would say I've been a head person, very logical. When I first had a heart opening, it took me by surprise because I couldn't I couldn't believe the fact that I was ignoring a very valid, complete data set in itself. And again, the head's way of thinking about data set and all that, right? Since I've done more somatic embodied work that helped me drop into my body, now I can again freedom of movement is what I value. So depending on the conversation, this conversation, I'm a head person, right? If I'm having a different conversation with somebody else, I'm a heart person completely, and head is not in the picture. Or I'm some kind of a blend when I'm in a coaching conversation, because I want to bring both. So it's that freedom of movement that I value, and I can happily say that now I have come to a level of freedom between these two.
If not in Goa, where would you live?
Perhaps not in India. I have considered Auroville, but Auroville was too slow for me and too much of a village. I needed some social interaction. I didn't want to go into a bubble or a cave. But if not Goa, at this point, I can't imagine being anywhere else in India. Simply for the fact that my lifestyle is very different from the lifestyle of the major cities. I like taking it slow. I'm not insistent on life being a certain way. In Goa, if something happens, you won't get a quick fix. You'll have to wait for the other person to decide when to show up. They call it a Susegard life, play relaxed, laid back. That I works out for me. And yeah.
Okay, and this last one that comes to me before Satish will, I'm taking away too much of time. Any book or quote that really changed your life? I mean, your life itself is a paradigm shift in many ways, but and we've discussed the role of mentors, played very important. But is there a book that was game changing for you, or any quote for that matter that really shook you up?
There is a book actually. Let me show you the book. It's not a very famous book. Let me get. This is a book. It's called the Ashtavakra Samhita. It's a Sanskrit book with an English translation. This book really changed my life in the sense that when I was having the spiritual experience, this book acted as a whetstone to verify and test against. And this is a conversation between the sage called Ashtavakra and the king, famous wise king Janaka. There's a conversation between two people who are awakened or enlightened, you can say, and how the world looks from their point of view, and they kind of riffing off each other. Not a quote specifically, but you can take any page and it says the same thing in all the verses. So, yeah.
If there was a movie made on your life, what would be the movie called?
Wow, I've never thought about this. Let me think about it. It sounds like a fun exercise. I had this phrase back in the day, which is something like, and it's on my WhatsApp, about whatever profile status. It says something like game changer, just playing an infinite game. And I think playing an infinite game would be something close to what I would imagine it would be. And
you'll have to pay royalty to Simon Sinek.
no, actually, I would have to pay royalty to James Cars, who was the guy who wrote the book Finite and Infinite Games.
Yeah, right.
Simon Sinek borrowed his idea and translated it into leadership.
Yeah.
Satish, over to you.
Yeah, Rajesh, thanks for coming up with these interesting questions, and thanks Rishi for sharing some interesting answers as well. So let us finish this conversation with one final serious question. Let me try to make it serious. It's a hypothetical question. Let us imagine that whatever that you have done in this lifetime, for some reason it's gone. Your coaching hours, your friends, your family, the book that you have written, whatever that you have accomplished is gone. It's taken away, and you get to leave behind some 3 truths about Rishi. Everything else is gone. Only 3 truths remaining. What would you say those 3 truths would be?
For the world, you mean, to the outside world?
Yeah.
The whole point is to have fun. It's a game. Right? Remember that it's a game, and the whole point is to have fun. If you can't remember that, try and see what's getting in the way of you remembering that. Second is it is finite. It's a short game that you'll get to play as a human being. Be aware of that fact rather than accepting it as an obvious and discarding it, which is what most of us do. Is we know that we're going to die, but we don't want to think about it because that's anywhere given. I would rather say be aware of it, keep it in your awareness, because that will influence how you would want to live your life. That's the second one. The third is everybody else is just like you. Fundamentally, we are more similar than we are different. And so
wow.
Let that inform how you interact.
Wow. What a way to end.
But some people are not the usual, right?
That's the paradox that we must hold.
Perhaps this should go as a title for this podcast.
That's right. And I just want to leave one last note for you, Rishi, is that you said when we were doing this before we started, you said, I'm looking forward to. I asked you what would be the outcome of this, and you said that if something surprising comes out of my mouth in this podcast, has there been something surprising that caught you in this podcast that came out that you were not aware of?
Yeah. There was, I think, when we were talking about executive presence, I've never really talked about articulating it in that way as a specific manifestation, and pointing out that presence shows up differently when you're doing different activities. That was definitely a new thought that I had this time. So,
thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure. I think we really had a great time picking your brains, and really it's fascinating to know about your journey, and more power to you as you go and play this infinite game.
Thank you, Rajesh.
Yeah. Listeners and viewers, thank you so much for your patient listening, and this has been a fascinating conversation for me. I'm going to go back to this episode a couple of times in future to really understand what actually transpired here. So thank you, Rishi, for your presence, and thank you, Rajesh, as well, for your time. Really appreciate you guys, and I really applaud and appreciate the way you guys are showing up in this world and making a difference. Keep going, and more power to you both. Thank you so much. So that brings us to the end of this podcast. Thank you so much for your patient listening. Have an amazing day. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah.